The email notification chimed at 3:42 a.m., pulling Sarah Mitchell from restless half-sleep in the cramped studio apartment she shared with her 7-year-old daughter Emma. The phone's blue glow illuminated water stains on the ceiling that the landlord had promised to fix 6 months ago, back when Sarah still believed promises from men in positions of power meant something. She squinted at the screen. County Asset Recovery Department. Subject line, Final Notice, Abandoned Mining Claim number 4721. Sarah should have deleted it. Should have rolled over, pulled the threadbare blanket tighter against the October chill seeping through windows that didn't quite close, and try to steal another hour of sleep before her 6 a.m. shift at the diner. But insomnia and desperation made strange bedfellows, and she'd been sleeping with both for the 16 months since David had walked out, leaving her with a daughter, $87,000 in his gambling debts that somehow had her name on them too, and exactly zero sympathy from a legal system that didn't care whose signature was forged. She opened the email. The abandoned mining claim sat in Harlan County, Kentucky, 3 hours from the Louisville apartment that cost $1,400 a month she could barely afford. The county was liquidating it for unpaid property taxes. Starting bid, $1. $1 for 43 acres and whatever remained of the Clearwater diamond mine. Abandoned in 1987 after the company went bankrupt and the owner died without heirs. The listing included 3 photos: rusted chain-link fence, a collapsed wooden structure that might have once been an office, and a gaping hole in a hillside surrounded by warning signs about unstable ground and toxic materials. Sarah zoomed in on the 3rd photo. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete and steel bars. Official condemnation notices plastered across it like obituaries. Danger, do not enter. Structural failure. Toxic substances present. State Mining Commission. Site remediation required. Any reasonable person would see a liability. A money pit that would cost tens of thousands just to make safe, let alone profitable. The kind of problem that destroyed people already hanging by threads. But Sarah had stopped being reasonable around the same time the bank started foreclosure proceedings on the house David had mortgaged without telling her, around the time Emma's school asked if there was trouble at home, because her daughter wore the same 3 outfits on rotation. Around the time Sarah started calculating which bills could be delayed another month without the lights getting shut off. She read the fine print. Auction closes in 48 hours. Minimum bid required to participate, $1. Winner assumes all liability, all remediation costs, all outstanding claims. 43 acres. Even worthless land had to be worth something. And the name, Clearwater Diamond Mine, suggested there had been value once, even if it was long gone. Sarah's banking app showed $347.22. That was rent money, grocery money, the gas she needed to get to work. But it was also the most money she'd had in one account in 6 months, and the eviction notice tucked in her purse said she had 30 days to vacate anyway. She thought about Emma sleeping in the next room, curled around the stuffed rabbit that used to be white but had grayed from too many washings. Thought about the dreams her daughter still had, the innocence that let her believe her mama could fix anything. Thought about the woman Sarah used to be before marriage, and betrayal had ground her down to someone who accepted scraps and called it survival. The auction site required a $50 deposit to bid. Refundable if you lost, applied to purchase if you won. Sarah's finger hovered over the register to bid button. Across the room, Emma stirred, murmured something in her sleep. Sarah had been 23 when she got pregnant, 24 when she married David because it seemed like the right thing to do, 29 when he left, and 31 now, feeling 50 and wondering when life had stopped offering choices and started only offering consequences. She clicked the button, entered her debit card information. The deposit processed. 48 hours until the auction closed. 48 hours to talk herself out of the most reckless thing she'd considered since trusting a man who smiled while he lied. But she didn't talk herself out of it. The next 2 days passed in a fog of diner shifts and Emma's questions about why Mama seemed distracted. Sarah checked the auction site obsessively, watching the clock count down. No other bids appeared. No one else wanted a condemned diamond mine in rural Kentucky with more liabilities than a toxic waste dump. At 5:58 p.m. on Friday evening, Sarah sat in her car outside Emma's school, waiting for the aftercare program to release her daughter. The auction closed at 6 p.m. She placed her bid, $1. The screen refreshed. Congratulations. You are the winning bidder. Please complete payment within 72 hours. Sarah's hands shook on the steering wheel. She just bought a diamond mine for $1. She owned 43 acres in Kentucky. She was either the stupidest woman alive or had just made the only smart decision of her adult life, and she wouldn't know which until it was too late to matter. Emma climbed into the car, backpack bouncing against her thin shoulders. Mama, guess what? We learned about rocks today in science. Did you know diamonds are just carbon that got squeezed really hard? Isn't that cool? Sarah looked at her daughter's bright eyes, at the hope that still lived there despite everything. Yeah, baby, that's really cool. She paid the $1 that night, received a digital deed by email. Sarah Mitchell, sole owner of mining claim number 4721, also known as Clearwater Diamond Mine, Harlan County, Kentucky. The mockery started almost immediately. Sarah made the mistake of mentioning it at work, telling Rita behind the counter that she'd bought property, was thinking about moving, starting over somewhere cheaper. Rita's laugh had echoed through the diner. You bought what? A diamond mine? For $1. Rita's voice carried to every booth, every customer. Honey, if it was worth anything, it wouldn't cost $1. You just bought yourself a hole in the ground filled with God knows what kind of toxic mess. Marcus, the line cook, leaned through the kitchen window. My cousin lives in Harlan County. That mine's been dead 30 years. They sealed it because the shaft was collapsing. You'd need millions just to make it safe. And for what? There ain't been diamonds in Kentucky since before the Civil War, and even those were industrial grade, not worth nothing. The lunch crowd joined in, offering helpful observations about foolish women and bad decisions, about how maybe Sarah should focus on keeping a job instead of chasing fantasies. She smiled through it, kept pouring coffee, told herself their laughter didn't matter. But it did. It always did. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, called her in for a conference the following week. I understand you've purchased property in Harlan County? Yes. Sarah kept her voice steady. And you're considering moving Emma out of her school, away from her support system, to chase what exactly? Mrs. Henderson's expression mixed pity with judgment. Sarah, I say this with compassion. You're going through a difficult time. The divorce, the financial stress. But making impulsive decisions that uproot your daughter isn't the answer. Emma needs stability right now, not more chaos. Sarah's sister Jessica was even more direct. Are you having a breakdown? Because buying an abandoned mine sounds like a breakdown. You need to see someone, get help. This isn't normal behavior. I'm trying to give us a fresh start, Sarah said. A fresh start involves getting a better job, finding a cheaper apartment, being responsible. Not dragging Emma to the middle of nowhere to live next to a toxic waste site. Even Emma seemed uncertain when Sarah finally told her. They were packing up the apartment, 30-day eviction notice having forced the decision. Sarah had quit the diner, loaded everything they owned into her 15-year-old Toyota, and pointed it toward Kentucky. Why are we moving to a mine? Emma asked quietly. Because it's ours, baby. Because sometimes you have to take a chance on something nobody else believes in. But what if they're right? What if it's dangerous? Sarah pulled her daughter close. Then we'll figure out together. We always do. The drive to Harlan County took 4 hours through mountains that grew steeper and more remote with each passing mile. Towns became smaller, houses more scattered, poverty more visible in the sagging porches and rusted cars on blocks. The GPS directed them down increasingly narrow roads until they turned onto a gravel path marked with a faded sign. Clearwater Mining Company. No trespassing. The fence was worse in person. Chain link eaten through with rust, sections collapsed completely, warning signs from 1987 barely legible. Beyond it, the landscape looked like God had taken a bite out of the mountain and spat it back in pieces. Piles of broken rock, abandoned equipment rusting into sculptures, and everywhere the evidence of human ambition that had failed and been left to rot. The mine office was a single-story concrete building with a caved-in roof and windows long since shattered. The door hung open on one hinge, revealing darkness inside. And at the far end of the property, carved into the hillside like a wound that never healed, was the mine entrance. Exactly as pictured, sealed with concrete and steel, condemnation notices, danger signs. Sarah parked the car and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel. "Mama," Emma's voice was small. "Where are we going to sleep?" Sarah looked at the ruined office, at the 43 acres of contaminated land, at the sealed mine that represented either the worst mistake of her life or something she couldn't yet see. "In the car tonight, baby. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." They slept in the Toyota that night, parked near the fence with the doors locked. Sarah didn't sleep, just listened to Emma's breathing and wondered what the hell she'd done. The Kentucky night was colder than Louisville, darker, filled with sounds she didn't recognize. Animals moving through underbrush, whined through empty structures. The distant rumble of what might have been thunder or might have been something shifting deep underground. At dawn, Sarah walked the property while Emma slept. Up close, it was even worse than the photo suggested. The office building wasn't just damaged, it was structurally unsound, floors buckled, walls cracked. She wouldn't let Emma near it. The abandoned equipment was junk. Rusted conveyor systems, a truck with no engine, tools corroded past any use. Scrap metal might bring a few $100s, but hauling it would cost more than it was worth. And everywhere, the broken rock. Not the gray stone she expected, but something else. In the early light, some pieces caught the sun and threw it back in ways that seemed wrong for ordinary rock. She picked one up, turned it over. The surface sparkled faintly, like someone had mixed glitter into concrete. She pocketed the rock and kept walking. The mine entrance fascinated and terrified her. The concrete seal was thick, reinforced with steel bars. Official notices dated from 1987, 1989, 1993, each one more emphatic than the last. Condemned. Dangerous. Keep out. But someone had maintained it. The concrete was old, but not crumbling. The steel was rusted, but intact. Someone had cared enough to keep it sealed properly, even as everything else fell apart. Why? Sarah walked back to the car and found Emma awake, eating a Pop-Tart from their dwindling supplies. "What are we doing today, Mama?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at the property, at the choices she'd made that led here. "We're going to figure out what we have." The Harlan County Courthouse was a two-story brick building that had probably been impressive in 1952, but now just looked tired. Sarah left Emma in the children's section of the tiny public library next door and approached the records department with the deed in her hand. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, examined the document with the expression of someone who'd seen every kind of human folly. "Clearwater Mine," she said. "You bought it at the county auction." "Yes, ma'am." "For $1. "Yes, ma'am." The clerk's expression shifted between pity and amusement. "Honey, do you know what you bought?" "A mining claim. 43 acres. A liability. That mine's been condemned since '87. The Clearwater Company went bankrupt trying to extract diamonds that weren't there. Owner died broke. The state did remediation in the '90s, sealed everything up because the shaft was collapsing and they found groundwater contamination. You're looking at probably $500,000 in environmental cleanup costs if you ever wanted to develop that land." Sarah's stomach sank. $500,000? At least. And that's if you can even get permits, which you probably can't. The Mining Commission has it flagged as a perpetual hazard site. So what am I supposed to do with it? The clerk softened slightly. "Honestly, walk away. You paid $1, you're out $1. Don't throw good money after bad, trying to make something of land that's been nothing but trouble for 40 years. Sarah took the deed back, hands trembling. "Can I see the original mining records? The surveys, the geological reports?" "Honey, why would you want to?" "Please, I need to understand what I bought." The clerk sighed, but led her to a back room filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. "Mining records are public. Help yourself, but you're wasting your time." Sarah spent 3 hours going through files while Emma colored pictures in the library. She found the Clearwater Mining Company's complete history, and it was exactly as bleak as everyone had said. Founded in 1954 by a geologist named Thomas Clearwater, who claimed he'd found diamond-bearing kimberlite in the Appalachian foothills. He'd raised capital, bought the land, started mining in 1956. For 30 years, they'd pulled industrial-grade diamonds from the shaft, small stones used in drill bits and cutting tools, nothing gem quality, barely profitable. By the 80s, the operation was failing. The easily accessible deposits were exhausted, and going deeper required capital they didn't have. Thomas Clearwater died in 1986. His son tried to keep it running for another year, then declared bankruptcy in 1987. The state sealed the mine in 1988 after an inspection revealed structural instability in the main shaft. Sarah read the geological surveys, the engineering reports. Everything said the same thing: marginal deposit, limited value, operation no longer economically viable. But then she found something odd tucked in the back of the file. A handwritten note dated 1986, 2 months before Thomas Clearwater died. The writing was shaky, the paper stained, but the words were clear. Found a deep formation. 20 years of mining the wrong zone. Real deposit is 400 feet lower, different orientation. Can't reach it with current shaft. Would need new excavation, new equipment, capital I don't have. Broke my heart to see it, and no, I can't touch it. But it's there. God help me, it's there. The note was signed, T. Clearwater. Sarah stared at it, heart pounding. A different deposit, 400 feet deeper. A formation they'd never mined because they didn't have the equipment or money to reach it. Sarah photographed the note with her phone, hands shaking so badly she had to brace her elbows on the table to keep the image steady. She went through the rest of the file twice more, searching for any other mention of this deep formation, but found nothing. Just Thomas Clearwater's final, desperate note about a fortune he'd discovered too late to claim. The clerk appeared in the doorway. "Finding what you need." "This note," Sarah said, holding up the paper. "Did anyone ever follow up on it? Did the state investigate this claim about a deeper deposit?" The clerk squinted at the document. "Never seen that before. But honey, you have to understand, Thomas Clearwater was dying when he wrote that. Cancer, I think. People say all kinds of things at the end, see patterns that aren't there, convince themselves their failures meant something. But what if he was right? Then someone with actual money would have bought that property years ago. Geologists have looked at that site. Mining companies have evaluated it. Nobody wanted it for a reason." She softened her tone. "I know you're looking for hope, but that mine is empty. All you'll find down there is debt and disappointment." Sarah gathered the files, thanked the clerk, and collected Emma from the library. They drove back to the property in silence, Emma sensing her mother's mood and staying quiet. That night, sleeping in the car again, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Thomas Clearwater's note. 20 years mining the wrong zone. Real deposit is 400 feet lower. It's there. God help me, it's there. What if everyone was wrong? What if the mockery, the dismissal, the certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake? What if all of it was based on incomplete information? She thought about her own life, about how many times people had told her what she was worth, what she deserved, what she was capable of. Her parents who said community college was good enough for someone like her. David who said she was lucky he'd married her when she got pregnant. The lawyers who said she should just accept the debt because fighting would cost more than she'd ever win. Every boss who'd passed her over, every teacher who'd lowered expectations, every system that had ground her down and called it helping. What if they were all wrong about this too? At dawn, Sarah made a decision. She was going to open that mine. The next week became a crash course in demolition, engineering, and the kind of desperate resourcefulness that came from having nothing left to lose. Sarah spent her remaining $297 on tools at a secondhand shop in Harlan, a sledgehammer, pry bars, work gloves, safety goggles, and a battery-powered lantern. The mine entrance's concrete seal had been poured 37 years ago. Time and weather had done some of the work already, creating cracks, allowing water infiltration that had weakened the structure. Sarah started with the largest crack, working the pry bar into it, levering chunks of concrete free. The work was brutal. Her hands blistered within an hour, then bled through the gloves. Her shoulders screamed. Her back seized up in knots that made her gasp. But she kept going, breaking the seal piece by piece, revealing the steel bars beneath. Emma helped where she could, carrying away broken concrete, bringing water, asking questions about geology, and mining that Sarah answered as best she could from what she'd read in the library. They made it a game, mother and daughter against the mountain, against the people who said they couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. Why do you think they sealed it so tight, Mama? Emma asked on the third day, watching Sarah attack another section of concrete with the sledgehammer. Because there was something inside worth protecting, Sarah said between swings. Or something dangerous. Maybe both. On the fifth day, Sarah broke through. The sledgehammer connected with concrete that crumbled differently, and suddenly there was a hole, darkness beyond, air that smelled of earth and water and time. She widened the opening, working carefully now, aware that the shaft behind the seal might be unstable. When the gap was large enough to crawl through, she grabbed the lantern and turned to Emma. Stay here. If anything happens, if you hear anything strange, you run to the car and drive to the library. Ask them to call for help. Mama, I can't drive. Then you run to the road and flag down whoever you see. Do not come in after me. Promise. Emma's eyes were huge with fear and excitement. I promise. Sarah squeezed through the opening, feeling steel bars scrape her shoulders, breathing air that had been sealed since 1987. The lantern illuminated rough-cut stone walls, a timber-supported shaft descending into darkness at a 45-degree angle. The timbers looked ancient, water-damaged, potentially unstable. Sarah tested the first one with her weight. It held. She moved deeper, one careful step at a time, the lantern beam bouncing off walls that showed pick marks, blast patterns, the evidence of men who'd worked here decades ago. 20 feet in, the shaft leveled out into a horizontal tunnel. Old rail tracks ran along the floor, rusted but still visible, marking where our carts had once traveled. The ceiling was higher here, maybe 7 feet, supported by thick wooden beams every 10 feet. Sarah played the lantern beam along the walls and stopped. The rock here sparkled, not faintly like the pieces she'd found outside, but noticeably, catching light and throwing it back in ways that ordinary stone didn't. She touched the wall, felt rough crystal formations embedded in the matrix. This was kimberlite, the volcanic rock that carried diamonds up from deep in the earth. She'd read about it in the library. How diamonds formed 100 miles underground under immense pressure and heat, then rode volcanic eruptions to the surface, trapped in kimberlite like passengers in an elevator. But according to the records, the Clearwater mine had mostly exhausted its kimberlite deposits by the 80s. This tunnel shouldn't be showing this much visible crystallization. Unless this wasn't one of the main mining tunnels. Unless she'd found something else. Sarah moved deeper, marking her path with chalk on the wall, every 20 feet, so she could find her way back. The tunnel branched, and she chose the right path, following a subtle downward slope. The air grew colder, damper. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling in depressions in the floor. 50 feet in, she found the equipment. Old mining gear abandoned in place. A drill rig rusted solid, or carts frozen on their tracks. Tools scattered like the workers had left mid-shift and never returned. Everything covered in a fine layer of mineral deposits from decades of dripping water. But something was wrong. The equipment was too deep, too far from the main entrance. Why would they have mining gear this far into an exhausted tunnel? Sarah kept moving, her sense of time distorting in the darkness. She might have walked for 10 minutes or an hour. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, sloping gradually downward, the walls growing rougher, less finished, like the miners had been rushing toward something, cutting corners, abandoning proper technique in favor of speed. Then the tunnel opened up. Sarah stepped into a chamber that made her breath catch. It was massive, maybe 60 feet across and 40 feet high. The walls raw, kimberlite shot through with veins of something that glittered in her lantern light like a sky full of stars. The floor was covered in standing water, maybe 6 inches deep, perfectly still, reflecting her lantern beam back like a dark mirror. And rising from that water, in the center of the chamber, was a formation that shouldn't exist. It looked like a crystal garden, a cluster of geometric shapes jutting up from the submerged floor, each one catching light and breaking it into colors. Not the industrial gray of the diamonds she'd read about, but something else. Blues and yellows and even hints of pink, colors that suggested gem-quality stones, not industrial-grade cutting tools. Sarah waded into the water, feeling cold seep through her boots. She reached the formation and knelt down, bringing the lantern close. The crystals were embedded in kimberlite, but weathering had partially exposed them. Some were the size of her thumbnail. Others were larger, protruding from the matrix like teeth. She touched one gently, felt its sharp edges, the way it was cooler than the surrounding rock. This was the deep formation. This was what Thomas Clearwater had found in his final months. What had broken his heart, because he didn't have the money or equipment to mine it properly. Sarah pulled out her phone, trying to document everything, but there was no signal this deep. She'd have to rely on memory and hope she could find her way back. She was turning to leave when her lantern beam caught something else. A darker opening on the far side of the chamber. Another tunnel continuing deeper into the mountain. Every instinct screamed to go back, to get Emma, to process what she'd already found before pushing further. But Sarah had spent 31 years listening to instincts that told her to be careful, to play it safe, to accept less because wanting more was dangerous. She crossed the chamber and entered the second tunnel. This one was different, narrower, more roughly cut, and descending steeply. No rail tracks, no equipment. This wasn't a mining tunnel. This was exploratory, someone pushing into unknown territory, following a hunch or a theory. The walls here were different too. Instead of scattered crystals in kimberlite, she saw layers of different rock types, geological strata that suggested she was moving deeper, not just physically, but through time, through epochs of Earth's history. 100 feet down the steep tunnel, Sarah's lantern illuminated something that made no sense. A wooden door set into the rock wall, modern construction, completely out of place in a mine that had been sealed since 1987. The door had a padlock on it, but the lock was open, hanging from the latch like someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to secure it behind them. Sarah pushed the door open. It swung easily on well-maintained hinges, revealing a small room carved into the rock. And inside that room, illuminated by her lantern beam, was evidence that Thomas Clearwater had worked down here in secret long after the mine officially closed. There was a desk, a chair, both newer than the abandoned equipment she'd passed earlier. A camping lantern, long dead, but clearly from the 1990s based on its style. Papers spread across the desk, protected from moisture by a plastic tarp. And on the walls, maps. Hand-drawn geological surveys showing the mine's layout, the known deposits, and below them, sketched in different colored ink, a massive formation that extended hundreds of feet deeper than any official mining had ever gone. Sarah approached the desk, her hands shaking. The papers were Thomas Clearwater's notes, dated from 1986 through 1997, 11 years after the mine officially closed, 11 years after he was supposed to have died. She read, her heart pounding harder with each page. June 1986. Found it. The main deposit isn't where we thought. We've been mining the periphery for 30 years, pulling marginal stones from the edges of a formation that goes much deeper. The kimberlite pipe doesn't end at 200 feet. It continues down at least another 400, possibly more. Core samples show concentration increasing with depth. This isn't a depleted mine. We never even reached the real treasure. August 1986. Doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Cancer's in my lungs, my bones. Poetic, I suppose. Spent my life breathing rock dust. Now the rocks are killing me. I've seen what's down there. I know what this mountain is hiding. If I had time, if I had money, I could prove it. But I have neither. October 1986. Fake my death. Easier than you'd think when you're dying anyway. Let them think I died in the hospital. Let the mine close. Let the state seal it. They don't know about the back entrance, the shaft I dug from the old Pritchard property. I can still access the deep formation, still working in secret. Maybe I can pull enough stones to fund proper excavation. Maybe I can prove I wasn't crazy. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned pages, reading Thomas Clearwater's secret life, The 11 years he'd spent working alone in the darkness, dying slowly while he tried to prove what he'd found. March 1991, 5 years since my death. The cancer should have killed me by now, but spite is a powerful medicine. I've extracted approximately 400 carats of rough diamonds from the chamber, all gem quality, colors I've never seen in Kentucky stone. Blues, pinks, yellows. I sent them to a dealer in New York using a fake name. He confirmed what I suspected. These aren't industrial diamonds. These are gemstones, rare colored diamonds, potentially worth thousands per carat. July 1993. The state did another remediation, sealed the main entrance even tighter. Good. Keeps everyone away while I work. I've been going deeper, following the pipe. The formation is massive, possibly one of the largest diamond deposits in North America. If this were Africa or Russia, there'd be a billion-dollar mining operation here. But it's Kentucky, and everyone thinks they know what Kentucky can and can't produce. December 1995. I'm 73 years old and shouldn't be alive. The cancer's eating me slowly, but I keep working. I've mapped the entire deep formation. Conservative estimate, 50,000 carats of recoverable gem-quality diamonds, possibly twice that if you include the industrial-grade stones. At current market rates, we're talking about a deposit worth $500 million. More if the colored stones grade as highly as I think they will. April 1997. I'm dying for real now. Can't climb down to the chamber anymore. Can barely walk. The stones I've extracted are hidden in the lower chamber, in the crystal cavern. About 2,000 carats worth, my proof, my legacy, my evidence that I wasn't a failure. Whoever finds this, whoever has the courage to come down here and see what I saw, tell them Thomas Clearwater wasn't crazy. Tell them I found something beautiful and died protecting it, because I couldn't bear to see it destroyed by people who wouldn't understand. That was the last entry, dated April 19th, 1997. Sarah sat in Thomas Clearwater's secret office, surrounded by his maps and notes and broken dreams, and understood what she'd inherited. Not just a condemned mine, but a secret that had killed its discoverer slowly over 11 years of lonely work in the darkness. She gathered the most important documents, carefully folding them and tucking them inside her jacket. She photographed the wall maps with her phone, capturing every detail of Thomas's geological surveys. Then she made her way back through the tunnels, through the crystal chamber where diamonds grew from stone like flowers, through the equipment graveyard, back toward daylight and her daughter, and a decision that would define everything that came after. Emma was exactly where Sarah had left her, sitting on a rock near the mine entrance, reading a book she'd brought from the library. "Mama!" She jumped up when Sarah emerged, squinting against daylight after hours in darkness. "You were gone so long. I was getting scared." Sarah pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, feeling sunlight on her face, breathing clean air, alive when Thomas Clearwater had died alone in the mountain. "I found it, baby. I found what everyone said didn't exist." That night, Sarah spread Thomas Clearwater's documents on the hood of her car, using the dome light to read, while Emma slept in the back seat. She studied the maps, the notes, the careful records of a man who'd spent 11 years proving himself right to an audience of stone and silence. According to Thomas's calculations, the crystal chamber contained approximately 2,000 carats of already extracted diamonds, the stones he'd pulled from the formation over years of secret work. Those alone could be worth millions. But the real treasure was still in the ground. The deep formation he'd mapped but couldn't fully mine. 50,000 carats, possibly more, of gem-quality colored diamonds. Sarah did the math on her phone's calculator. Even at conservative estimates, $5,000 per carat for the colored stones, $1,000 for the standard gems, she was looking at a deposit worth over $300 million. Possibly much more if the rare pinks and blues graded as highly as Thomas believed. $300 million buried under property she'd bought for $1. But knowing it existed and claiming it were different things. She'd need equipment, expertise, permits, legal authorization to reopen a mine that the state had condemned. She'd need geologists to verify Thomas's findings, mining engineers to design safe extraction, environmental studies to satisfy regulators. She'd need money. She didn't have to prove she owned a fortune. The impossibility of it hit her like a wave. She was a single mother with $43 in her bank account, sleeping in her car, with no mining experience, and a criminal husband's debts still hanging over her head. What was she supposed to do? Walk into a bank and ask for a loan to mine diamonds everyone said didn't exist? Sarah looked at the mine entrance, at the darkness that had swallowed Thomas Clearwater's life, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was going back down. She was going to find Thomas's extracted stones, the 2,000 carats he'd hidden in the crystal chamber. If she could bring up even a fraction of that, if she could get them appraised and verified, she'd have proof. She'd have leverage. She'd have something to show the world that she wasn't crazy. But first, she needed help. Vernon Pike lived in a trailer at the edge of Harlan County, down a dirt road that didn't appear on any GPS. Sarah found him through the library clerk who mentioned he'd worked at the Clearwater mine back in the 60s, before it started failing, before Thomas's son ran it into bankruptcy. Vernon was 83 years old, thin as wire, with hands that shook from age or alcohol or both. But his eyes were sharp when he looked at Sarah, and sharper still when she showed him Thomas Clearwater's maps. "Where'd you get these?" His voice was rough, worn down by cigarettes and coal dust. "I bought the mine at auction. I found Thomas's secret office in the deep tunnels." Vernon's hand stopped shaking as he studied the documents. "Tom died in '86. At least that's what we were told. He faked it, kept working the mine in secret for another 11 years. Son of a bitch." Vernon's laugh turned into a cough that bent him double. When he recovered, he looked at Sarah with something like respect. "You been down to the crystal chamber? You seen it yourself?" "Yesterday. It's exactly like his maps show. Diamonds in the kimberlite. More than I've ever seen in any photos or descriptions. Blues and pinks and yellows." Vernon nodded slowly. "Tom always said we were mining the wrong zone. Said the real deposit was deeper, but the company wouldn't fund the exploration. They wanted fast returns, easy extraction. By the time Tom found proof of the deep formation, the money was gone and he was dying." "Will you help me?" Sarah asked. "I need someone who knows mines, who knows what we're looking at." You need a miracle," Vernon interrupted. "You know what it costs to reopen a condemned mine? You know the regulations, the safety requirements, the environmental impact studies? You're talking millions in startup costs before you pull a single stone." "I know, but Thomas left approximately 2,000 carats already extracted in the chamber. If I can bring those up, get them appraised, I'll have proof. I'll have collateral." Vernon was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tom Clearwater was my friend. Best boss I ever had. Only one who gave a damn about the men who worked for him. If he spent 11 years down there pulling stones, if he died believing in this." He met Sarah's eyes. "I'll help, but I'm too old to go underground. You'll be doing the heavy work." "I can handle heavy work." "Yeah." Vernon looked at her calloused hands, her determined expression. "I believe you can." They spent the next week preparing. Vernon taught Sarah everything he remembered about mine safety, about reading structural integrity, about identifying kimberlite and worthless rock. He drew maps showing her the safest routes through the old tunnels, warned her about areas prone to collapse, explained the ventilation system that no longer functioned. "You'll need breathing protection," he said. "The air down there's been stagnant for decades. Could be pockets of bad gas, methane, carbon dioxide. You pass out down there alone, that's how you die." Sarah bought a respirator with money she should have spent on food. Bought rope, climbing gear, better lights. Spent her last $60 on supplies while Emma ate ramen noodles and asked why they couldn't afford meat anymore. "Soon, baby," Sarah promised. "Just a little longer." On the 8th day, Sarah went back into the mine. This time she was prepared, properly equipped, with Vernon waiting at the entrance and Emma safely in town at the library. She made it to the crystal chamber in 40 minutes, moving carefully, checking every support beam, testing every step. The standing water was exactly as she remembered, the crystal formation rising from it like a sculpture of frozen light. Thomas's notes had said he'd hidden the extracted stones in the chamber, but hadn't specified where. Sarah waded through the water, searching. Nothing obvious presented itself. No chest, no cash, no marking saying diamonds here. She spent an hour searching before logic overrode frustration. Thomas was dying, weak, couldn't have moved heavy containers or dug deep hiding spots. Whatever he'd done had to be simple, accessible, something he could reach even at his weakest. Sarah looked at the crystal formation itself, looked at how it rose from the water, how its base disappeared into the submerged floor. She knelt in the cold water, ducking her head under, using her waterproof light to examine the formation's base. There, set into the kimberlite at the formation's root, a metal box, military surplus by the look of it, wedged into a natural cavity and sealed with waterproof tape. Sarah pried it free, brought it above water, carried it to dry ground near the tunnel entrance. Her hands shook as she peeled away the tape and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and nested in foam, were dozens of small cloth bags. Sarah opened one and poured its contents into her palm. Diamonds. Rough, uncut, but unmistakably diamonds. A handful of stones ranging from the size of rice grains to one that was nearly as big as her thumb. And they weren't the industrial gray she'd expected. These showed color even in their rough state. Blues, yellows, hints of pink. She checked another bag. More colored stones. Another bag. Same thing. Thomas Clearwater had spent 11 years extracting the finest diamonds from the deep formation, saving them, protecting them, leaving them for whoever had the courage to come after him. Sarah counted the bags. 27 in total. If each one held approximately 75 carats, and Thomas's note said he'd extracted about 2,000 total carats, the math worked. This was it. This was Thomas's proof, his legacy, his evidence that he'd been right all along. Sarah repacked the box, sealed it, carried it through the tunnels like she was carrying her daughter, like she was carrying hope itself. When she emerged into daylight, Vernon was waiting, and the expression on her face told him everything. You found them. 27 bags. About 2,000 carats rough. Sarah's voice shook. Vernon, they're colored diamonds. Blues, pinks, yellows. Even rough, I can see their gem quality. Vernon's hands shook worse than usual as he opened one bag, examined the stones. Tears ran down his weathered face. Tom, you magnificent bastard. You really did it. The appraiser's office in Louisville occupied the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. Marcus Chun had been cutting and evaluating gemstones for 40 years, and his reputation was the kind that couldn't be bought, only earned through decades of calling things exactly as they were, even when clients wanted to hear something different. Sarah had found him through 3 hours of internet research at the Harlan County Library, cross-referencing reviews and credentials, looking for someone who wouldn't dismiss her outright when she walked in with a box full of rough diamonds, allegedly from Kentucky. She'd left Emma with Vernon, driven 4 hours to Louisville with the metal box buckled into the passenger seat like a child, and now sat across from Marcus Chun while he examined the first bag of stones under a jeweler's loop. The silence stretched. Marcus said nothing, just moved from stone to stone, occasionally making a small sound that could have meant anything. After 15 minutes that felt like hours, he looked up. Where did you get these? From a mine I own. The Clearwater Mine in Harlan County. That mine's been closed since the 80s. I know. The original owner kept working it in secret. He left these behind. Marcus returned his attention to the stones, examining several more. Finally, he set down the loop and looked at Sarah directly. These are real, natural diamonds, uncut, various grades of quality. The colored stones are particularly interesting. Natural fancy color diamonds are rare, especially in these hues. Blues are most likely caused by boron impurity, pinks probably from plastic deformation in the crystal structure, yellows from nitrogen. Sarah's heart hammered. What are they worth? That depends on how they cut, what the clarity is after cutting, the final carat weight. But rough estimate, assuming average quality grades and standard cuts. He paused, doing calculations. You're looking at somewhere between $8 and $15 million for what's in this box. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd expected thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. But millions? That's conservative, Marcus continued. If some of these grade higher, if you get a few stones that are truly exceptional in color and clarity, the value could be significantly more. Fancy colored diamonds, especially rare colors like pink and blue, can sell for hundreds of thousands per carat at auction. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't process. $8 to $15 million sitting in a metal box on Marcus Chen's desk. Money that could erase every debt, every fear, every sleepless night, wondering how she'd feed her daughter. I need you to understand something, Marcus said carefully. The moment you try to sell these, you're going to face questions. Where they came from, whether you have legal right to them, whether they need to be certified conflict-free, whether there are any claims against the property they came from. You need a lawyer before you need a buyer. I own the property. I have the deed. That's a start. But you'll want documentation showing the chain of custody, geological surveys, proving they came from your mine, expert certification that they're natural and not synthetic. The high-end diamond market is extremely cautious about provenance. Sarah nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Can you provide some of that certification? Can you verify these are natural Kentucky diamonds? I can test them, yes. Full analysis will take about 2 weeks and cost you $3,000. Sarah's stomach dropped. I don't have $3,000. Marcus studied her, seeing past the carefully maintained appearance to the desperation underneath. You just showed me $8 million in rough diamonds, and you don't have $3,000 for certification? I bought the mine for $1. It's all I had. I've been living in my car with my daughter while I figured out what I'd inherited. The appraiser was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a contract, and slid it across the desk. I'll do the analysis on contingency. If these stones sell, you pay me 5% of the certified value as my fee. That covers the testing, the documentation, and my professional reputation backing the provenance. If they don't sell, you owe me nothing. Why would you do that? Marcus smiled slightly. Because I've been in this business 40 years, and I've seen a lot of people walk through that door with dreams. Most of them are selling grandmother's cubic zirconia or mall jewelry they think is worth a fortune. You're the first person who's ever brought me something real and had no idea what you were holding. That kind of authenticity is rare. I'd like to be part of whatever happens next. Sarah signed the contract with shaking hands. The drive back to Harlan County felt surreal. $8 to $15 million. The number kept repeating in her head, refusing to feel real. She'd spent 31 years believing money like that existed only for other people. People born into it, people who'd earned it through education and opportunities she'd never had access to, people fundamentally different from single mothers sleeping in their cars. But Thomas Clearwater had been a working geologist, not a billionaire. He'd found a fortune through stubbornness, expertise, and refusing to accept what everyone told him was true. And now that fortune was Sarah's. If she could navigate the legal complexities, the skepticism, the inevitable attempts to take it away from her. Vernon was waiting when she pulled up to the mine property. Emma was beside him, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Well, Vernon asked. He said they're real. 8 to 15 million, rough estimate. Vernon's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on a rock, staring at Sarah. Christ almighty. Mama, Emma had stopped drawing. Did you say million? Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level. Yeah, baby. The stones from the mine are worth a lot of money. Enough to change our lives. Emma's face lit up with hope, so pure it hurt. Does that mean we don't have to sleep in the car anymore? Yeah, baby. It means we're going to be okay. But being okay turned out to be more complicated than Sarah had anticipated. The news about the diamond discovery spread through Harlan County like wildfire, and with it came attention she wasn't prepared for. The first visitor arrived 3 days after her meeting with Marcus Chun, a man in an expensive suit driving a Range Rover that looked obscene on the gravel road to the mine. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Robert Vance, representing Cordell Mining Corporation. We've heard about your discovery, and we'd like to discuss a partnership opportunity. Sarah met him at the property line, Vernon beside her, both of them dusty from the work they'd been doing to shore up the mine entrance. What kind of partnership? Vance smiled, the kind of smile that probably closed deals in boardrooms but felt predatory here in the Kentucky hills. You've discovered a valuable deposit, but you lack the expertise and capital to extract it efficiently. Cordell has been mining diamonds worldwide for 60 years. We have the equipment, the knowledge, the distribution networks. We could begin extraction within 6 months and have you seeing returns within a year. In exchange for what? Standard terms. Cordell takes 60% of the extracted value. You retain 40%. We assume all operational costs, all liability, all permitting and regulatory compliance. Sarah did the math in her head. If Thomas's estimates were right, if the deep formation really held 50,000 carats worth $300 million, 40% would be $120 million. Life-changing money by any measure. But 60% would be $180 million going to Cordell. Going to people who'd done nothing except show up after she'd taken all the risk. I'm not interested in giving away the majority of what I found. Vance's smile never wavered. Ms. Mitchell, you have to be realistic. You're a single mother with no mining experience trying to develop a condemned site that's been closed for 40 years. The regulatory hurdles alone will take years to navigate. You could spend the next decade fighting bureaucracy while your daughter lives in poverty, or you could partner with Cordell and start seeing income immediately. She said no. Vernon growled. Time for you to leave. Vance ignored him, keeping his focus on Sarah. Think about your daughter. Think about what kind of life you could give her with reliable income starting next year. Think about the risks of going it alone, equipment failures, legal challenges, market fluctuations. Cordell offers stability. Cordell offers theft, Vernon said. 60% for showing up with checkbooks and lawyers. That's not partnership, that's exploitation. Vance finally acknowledged Vernon with a look of contempt. The old miner. I should have known. Let me guess, you're filling her head with fantasies about doing this independently, about small-time operations competing with major corporations. That kind of thinking is why you spent your career working for other people instead of building something yourself. Vernon stepped forward, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. She looked at Robert Vance, at his expensive suit and practiced smile and absolute certainty that she'd eventually accept his offer, because what choice did desperate people have? My daughter has already spent months living in a car while I figured out what we had here. She's watched me work 14-hour days on blistered hands. Watched me refuse to give up even when everyone said I was crazy. You know what that taught her? That her mother doesn't accept other people's valuations of what she's worth. That she fights for what's hers. Sarah stepped closer to Vance, close enough to see his smile falter. I own this mine. I own what's in the ground. And I'll develop it on my terms, at my pace with my control. So take your 60% offer and your stability and your condescending advice about my daughter and get off my property. Vance's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Cordell could have been an ally, but there are other ways to acquire properties we want. Think about that. He left, the Range Rover kicking up dust that hung in the air like a threat. That was probably stupid, Sarah said when he was gone. That was magnificent, Vernon corrected, but he meant what he said about other ways to acquire property. Cordell doesn't like hearing no. The harassment started within a week. Small things at first. The chain-link fence cut in multiple places, equipment Sarah had bought going missing, someone filing a complaint with the county about unauthorized mining activity that triggered an inspection. The inspector, a nervous man named Dale Hutchins, arrived with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. Ms. Mitchell, I've received reports that you're conducting active mining operations without the required permits. I need to examine the site. Sarah showed him everything. The sealed mine entrance she'd partially opened for exploration, the equipment she'd purchased but not yet used, the careful documentation she'd been keeping of every action she'd taken. I haven't conducted any extraction, she explained. I've been doing exploratory work on property I legally own, preparing to apply for the necessary permits to reopen the mine. Dale examined the entrance, the tunnel she'd explored, the maps and documentation. Finally, he made notes on his clipboard and sighed. Technically, you're in compliance. Exploratory work on your own property doesn't require mining permits. But Ms. Mitchell, whoever filed this complaint, is going to keep filing them. They're trying to bog you down in bureaucracy, make this too expensive and frustrating to continue. Let me guess, Cordell Mining Corporation? Dale didn't confirm or deny, but his expression said enough. I'd recommend applying for your permits as soon as possible. Once you're fully licensed, complaints like this have less teeth. The permit application process was labyrinthine. Sarah spent days at the county offices, filling out forms, paying fees she could barely afford, scheduling inspections and environmental surveys. Each step revealed 3 more steps. Each requirement led to additional requirements. She needed geological surveys conducted by licensed engineers. She needed environmental impact assessments. She needed structural integrity evaluations. She needed insurance, bonding, safety certifications. Every professional she contacted quoted prices in the tens of thousands. Money she wouldn't have until Marcus Chun completed his analysis, and she could sell some of Thomas Clearwater's extracted diamonds. It's designed to keep out small operators, Vernon explained one evening while they reviewed the permit requirements. Mining regulations favor big corporations with legal departments and bottomless budgets. They want you to fail, to get desperate, to accept Cordell's offer or someone else's. Then I need to change the game, Sarah said. She started making phone calls. First to Marcus Chun, asking if he could accelerate the analysis. Marcus said he'd try, but proper gemological testing couldn't be rushed without compromising accuracy. Then Sarah called Patricia Hendress, the property lawyer she'd found through online research, the same one who'd helped someone else in a similar situation. Patricia listened to Sarah's story, asked detailed questions about the deed, the mine's history, the discovery. You own the land free and clear, Patricia confirmed. And Kentucky law is favorable to mineral rights holders. What's on your property is yours, assuming you can prove you're following environmental and safety regulations. That's the problem. Proving compliance costs money. I don't have yet. How much money will you have when the diamonds are certified and sold? Sarah told her Marcus's estimate. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That changes things. I can work on contingency, take payment after you sell the first batch of stones. And I can start making noise about Cordell's harassment, file complaints about their interference with your legitimate business operations. Sometimes the best defense is aggressive offense. The third call went to a geological engineering firm in Lexington. Sarah explained what she had, what she needed, and asked if they'd be willing to conduct the required surveys on contingency. The engineer, a woman named Dr. Rachel Kimura, was intrigued. Kentucky diamonds are rare, and color diamonds even more so. If Thomas Clearwater surveys are accurate, this could be one of the most significant finds in North American mining history. I'd like to be part of documenting that. Send me everything you have, and I'll review it. Slowly, piece by piece, Sarah built a team. People who believed in what she'd found, who were willing to take payment after success instead of demanding cash up front, who saw in her story something worth supporting. But money remained the immediate problem. Sarah had $11 in her bank account. Emma needed school supplies, and they were still sleeping in the car because Sarah refused to spend money on housing when every dollar might be needed for permit fees or equipment. Vernon offered his trailer, but Sarah declined. You've already done too much. I can't take more charity. It ain't charity, it's survival. That girl shouldn't be sleeping in a car when there's a perfectly good couch going empty. Eventually, Sarah accepted, moving Emma's few possessions into Vernon's tiny trailer while she continued sleeping in the car, maintaining the fiction that she was just working late at the mine. Emma knew better. She was 7 years old, not stupid. Mama, why don't you sleep inside too? I'm keeping watch over the mine, baby. Making sure nobody messes with our property. It was partly true. Sarah did spend nights parked at the mine entrance, sleeping in 4-hour shifts, waking at every sound. The harassment had escalated. More fence cutting, someone trying to block the access road with fallen trees, an anonymous letter suggesting she should sell before accidents happened. She'd reported everything to the sheriff, who'd taken notes with the enthusiasm of someone doing the bare minimum his job required. No arrests were made, no investigations conducted, no protection offered. Sarah was alone, defending a fortune she'd found but couldn't yet claim, from people who wanted to take it through intimidation and attrition. The breaking point came on a cold October night, 3 weeks after her meeting with Marcus Chun. Sarah was asleep in the car when voices woke her. She sat up slowly, seeing flashlights moving near the mine entrance, 3 figures working on something. She grabbed her own flashlight and her phone, stepping out of the car. "This is private property. You need to leave." The figures froze. One of them turned toward her, and Sarah recognized him. Jake Cordell, Robert Vance's nephew, a man she'd seen around Harlan wearing expensive outdoor gear like he was playing at being rugged. "We're just looking around," Jake said. "Public lands, right? This is private land, and you know it. Leave now, or I'm calling the sheriff." "Call him." Jake's smile was visible even in the darkness. "See how fast he shows up for you." The other 2 men moved toward her, and Sarah's heart started hammering. 3 against 1, in the dark, miles from help. She raised her phone, finger on the camera button. "I'm recording this. Everything you do right now is being documented. You want to assault a woman on camera? Go ahead. See how that plays in court." The men stopped. Jake's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're messing with. Cordell Mining has been operating in Kentucky for 70 years. We have relationships. We have resources. We have patience. You're a single mother squatting on a worthless mine, pretending you found something valuable. That story ends one way, with you broke and desperate, selling to us for whatever we offer. Get off my property." Jake and his companions left, but his words stayed with Sarah long after the sound of their truck faded. They were right about one thing. This was a war of attrition, and Sarah was running out of resources to sustain the fight. The next morning, she made a decision. She needed money now, needed it before Marcus finished his full analysis, needed it to fund permits and lawyers and the defense of what she'd found. She drove back to Louisville with 5 of Thomas Clearwater's diamonds, small stones, not the most valuable, but gem-quality colored diamonds nonetheless. Marcus had given her a preliminary evaluation on these specific stones during their first meeting. She found a jewelry buyer on East Market Street, a man who dealt in estate sales and unusual stones. She showed him the diamonds, explained they were Kentucky mined, and asked what he'd pay. He examined them under magnification, tested them, and offered her $40,000 for all 5. Sarah knew they were worth more. Marcus had estimated these particular stones at around $75,000. But she also knew she had no leverage, no time, no ability to wait for better offers. She accepted the $40,000. The money hit her account within an hour. Sarah sat in her car outside the jewelry store and cried, great shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep. $40,000. More money than she'd ever had. More than she'd made in 2 years at the diner. It was also a fraction of what those stones were worth, a fraction of what waited in the ground. A reminder that even when you found a fortune, extracting it meant accepting losses along the way. Sarah pulled herself together, wiped her face, and started making calls. The first $5,000 went to Patricia Hendress as a retainer. The lawyer immediately filed restraining orders against Cordell Mining Corporation and its employees, documenting the harassment, the trespassing, the intimidation. Another $8,000 went to Dr. Kimura's firm to begin the geological surveys needed for permitting. $3,000 to Marcus Chun to accelerate his analysis of the remaining stones. $2,000 for insurance and bonding requirements. $1,500 for safety equipment and proper mining gear. $500 for a security camera system for the mine entrance. The remaining $20,000 Sarah deposited in a separate account. Emergency funds for permits, fees, and the endless unexpected cost she was learning came with every step of this process. For the first time in 16 months, she also rented an apartment. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom in Harlan for $650 a month, but it had a roof that didn't leak, windows that closed, a lock on the door. Emma cried when she saw her own bedroom, the first space that was just hers since they'd left Louisville. "We're really staying, Mama? We're not leaving. We're staying, baby. This is home now." Dr. Kimura's survey team arrived on a gray November morning. 3 geologists with equipment that looked like it belonged on a Mars rover. They spent 2 weeks examining the property, taking core samples, mapping the deep formation, analyzing the kimberlite. When they presented their findings, Dr. Kimura's hands actually trembled as she showed Sarah the data. Thomas Clearwater was conservative in his estimates. The deep formation is larger than he mapped, and the diamond concentration is higher than he projected. We're looking at potentially 70 to 80,000 carats of recoverable stones, with an unusually high percentage of colored diamonds. Approximately 30% of the deposit shows color, when standard deposits average less than 5%. Sarah stared at the numbers, trying to process them. What does that mean in terms of value? Color diamonds, especially rare blues and pinks, can sell for 10 to 20 times the price of standard white diamonds. If we assume a mix of gem-quality stones averaging $8,000 per carat for colored and $1,500 for white. Dr. Kimura did calculations on her tablet. You're potentially looking at a deposit worth between $450 million and $650 million. The number was too large to feel real. Sarah heard it, understood the words, but couldn't connect them to her life, to the woman who'd been sleeping in her car 3 months ago. That's assuming optimal extraction and favorable market conditions, Dr. Kimura continued. But even conservative scenarios put this mine's value above $400 million. Sarah, this is one of the largest diamond deposits ever found in North America. It's going to attract attention. A lot of attention. The attention came faster than Sarah expected. Dr. Kimura's report had to be filed with the State Mining Commission as part of the permit application, and within days of that filing, Sarah's phone started ringing. Mining companies offering partnerships. Investment firms proposing funding deals. Lawyers representing interested parties who wanted to discuss acquisition. The offers range from insulting to suspicious, everyone trying to get a piece of what she'd found. And then the real threat started. A letter from Cordell Mining's legal department, claiming they held an option contract on the Clearwater Mine property dating from 1985, giving them first right of refusal on any sale or development. The contract was supposedly signed by Thomas Clearwater's son before the bankruptcy. Patricia Hendress examined the document and declared it forgery. The signatures don't match. The notary stamp is from a notary who didn't practice in Kentucky until 1990, and the contract references laws that weren't passed until 1988. This is fabricated, but fighting it would require lawyers, court battles, money, and time Sarah still didn't have enough of. Then the county suddenly discovered irregularities in Sarah's deed, suggesting the property might have been improperly transferred at the auction, that there might be outstanding claims from Thomas Clearwater's estate. More lawyers, more fees, more bureaucratic warfare designed to exhaust her resources and break her will. Sarah was sitting in her apartment one evening, reviewing legal documents and trying not to panic about mounting costs, when Emma appeared in the doorway. "Mama, are we going to lose the mine?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at the fear that no 7-year-old should have to carry. "No, baby, we're not." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not giving up. Because we've come too far. Because what we found is ours, and I'm going to fight for it until there's nothing left to fight with." Emma crawled into Sarah's lap, too big for it really, but small enough that Sarah could still hold her. "I'm scared." "Me too, baby. But being scared doesn't mean we quit. It just means we're doing something hard, something important." The next morning, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She contacted every journalist in Kentucky, every news outlet that might care about a single mother fighting a major mining corporation for control of a fortune she discovered. Most ignored her, but one didn't. Claire Santos was an investigative reporter for the Louisville Courier-Journal who specialized in stories about corporate misconduct and David versus Goliath battles. She'd won awards for exposing corruption, fighting for underdogs, telling stories the powerful wanted buried. She drove to Harlan County 3 days after Sarah's email and listened to the entire story. The dollar auction, the discovery, Thomas Clearwater's secret life, the diamonds in the crystal chamber, the harassment from Cordell Mining. "You have documentation for all of this?" Claire asked. Sarah showed her everything. The deed, Thomas's notes, the geological surveys, the harassment reports, the legal threats, Marcus Chin's preliminary appraisal. Claire's expression shifted from professional interest to something sharper. "This is one hell of a story. Single mother discovers $500 million diamond mine. Major corporation tries to steal it through intimidation and legal warfare. This is exactly the kind of thing people need to hear. Will you write it? I'll do better than write it. I'll make it front page. I'll make Cordell Mining explain their harassment in print. I'll make the county justify their sudden concerns about your deed. And I'll make sure everyone in Kentucky knows your name and what you're fighting for. The article ran on Sunday, filling the front page of the Courier-Journal with the headline, Single Mother's $1 Mine Purchase Yields Fortune, Sparks Corporate Battle. Claire had done exhaustive research, interviewing everyone involved, documenting every threat and intimidation tactic, laying out the story in prose that made Sarah sound heroic rather than desperate. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by national outlets. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all running variations of the same narrative. Working-class woman discovers diamonds, fights evil corporation, embodies American dream. Sarah's phone exploded with interview requests. She did 3 that first day, 5 the next, a dozen by the end of the week. Each time telling her story, showing Emma's face, making clear that this wasn't about greed. It was about a mother trying to give her daughter a future. The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of emails offering support. A GoFundMe campaign started by strangers raising $80,000 for her legal defense. Lawyers offering pro bono services. Mining experts volunteering consultation. And most importantly, scrutiny landing on Cordell Mining Corporation like a spotlight they couldn't escape. Within 2 weeks, 3 separate investigations were launched. State Attorney General looking into Cordell's business practices, SEC examining their financial disclosures, Kentucky Mining Commission reviewing their permits and compliance records. Robert Vance called, his smooth voice strained. Ms. Mitchell, this media circus isn't helping anyone. Perhaps we should sit down and discuss a reasonable resolution. I've told you my resolution. Get off my property and stop interfering with my legal rights. You're destroying our reputation with these allegations. I'm stating facts. If your reputation can't survive facts, that's not my problem. The legal pressure worked. Cordell's fabricated option contract fell apart under examination. Their claims about irregular deed transfer were dismissed by the county, and their harassment suddenly stopped when every action they took was being reported on the evening news. By December, 4 months after Sarah bought the mine for $1, the permits came through. Official authorization from the Kentucky Mining Commission to begin extraction operations at the Clearwater Diamond Mine, subject to ongoing environmental and safety monitoring. Marcus Chun completed his full analysis of Thomas Clearwater's extracted diamonds. The final count, 2,247 carats of gem-quality stones, with extraordinary color saturation in the blues and pinks. Estimated value, $23.7 million. Sarah stood in Marcus's office, staring at the number on his certification documents, and started laughing. Not happy laughter, but the kind that came when reality finally broke through disbelief. $23.7 million, she repeated. That's real? That's actually what they're worth. That's what they'll bring at auction, yes. I've already been contacted by 3 major auction houses wanting to handle the sale. Christie's is particularly interested. They're suggesting a dedicated auction for the collection, playing up the story of the Kentucky diamonds, the discovery, everything. They think the narrative alone will drive prices higher. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, sleeping in her car, mocked for buying a worthless mine, told repeatedly that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She thought about Emma in her own bedroom, in an apartment that was becoming a home, in a life that was finally stable. She thought about Thomas Clearwater working alone in the darkness for 11 years, dying believing no one would ever know what he'd found. Set up the auction, Sarah said, and make sure Thomas Clearwater's name is on everything. Make sure people know this wasn't my discovery. I just finished what he started. The Christie's auction took place on a February evening in New York City, in a room that smelled of old money and new ambition. Sarah sat in the front row wearing a dress she'd bought specifically for this occasion. The first dress she'd purchased in 5 years that wasn't from a thrift store. Emma sat beside her in a navy blue outfit that made her look older than 7, her small hand gripping Sarah's with nervous excitement. The auction catalog described the collection as the Clearwater Discovery, an extraordinary collection of natural fancy colored diamonds from Kentucky. Each lot was photographed beautifully, the stones now cut and polished by master craftsmen who'd spent months transforming Thomas's rough diamonds into gems that caught light and held it like captive stars. Marcus Chun sat 2 rows back, having flown in to witness the culmination of his analysis. Vernon had refused to come. Too fancy for an old coal miner, he'd said, but Sarah knew he was watching the live stream from his trailer in Harlan County. The auctioneer, a distinguished woman in her 60s named Catherine Holbrook, began with Lot 1, a 3.2-carat fancy vivid blue diamond, emerald cut, VS1 clarity. The estimated price was $800,000 to $1.2 million. Bidding opened at $600,000. Within 30 seconds, it hit $1 million. At 45 seconds, $1.5 million. The final hammer came down at $2.1 million, nearly double the high estimate. Sarah stopped breathing. 1 stone, $2.1 million. She owned 46 more. The auction continued for 2 hours, each lot exceeding estimates, some by spectacular margins. A 5.4-carat fancy intense pink sold for $4.7 million. A match pair of yellow diamonds, 2.1 carats each, brought $1.8 million. A rare green diamond, only 1.7 carats, but an extraordinary color, went for $3.2 million. By the time Catherine Holbrook brought down the final hammer, the total was staggering, $31.4 million. Not the $23.7 million Marcus had estimated, but $31.4 million. After Christie's commission and Marcus's contingency fee, Sarah would net approximately $26.8 million. $26,800,000. Sarah sat perfectly still while applause filled the auction room, while buyers congratulated themselves on acquiring pieces of American mining history, while Christie's staff began processing payments and arrangements. She sat still because moving meant accepting this was real, and accepting it was real meant confronting what came next. The decisions, the responsibility, the knowledge that she now had enough money to solve every problem she'd ever faced and create entirely new categories of problems she'd never imagined. Emma tugged her sleeve. "Mama, did we win?" Sarah looked at her daughter and started crying. Not sad tears, not happy tears exactly, but the kind that came when the universe shifted under your feet and you had to relearn how to stand. "Yeah, baby, we won." The media frenzy intensified after the auction. Sarah's story went from regional interest to national phenomenon. The woman who'd bought a mine for $1 and walked away with millions became a symbol of American entrepreneurship, bootstrap success, the dream that anyone could strike it rich if they just worked hard and got lucky. Sarah hated the narrative. It erased the terror, the sleepless nights, the months of poverty and uncertainty. It made success seem inevitable instead of improbable, made her choices seem smart instead of desperate. But she smiled through interviews and photo shoots and speaking requests because publicity served a purpose. It protected her from the people who still wanted to take what she'd found. Cordell Mining Corporation made one final attempt, filing a lawsuit claiming Sarah had violated environmental regulations during her exploration and owed damages. The suit was transparently frivolous, designed to force settlement, to extract payment for going away. Patricia Hendress destroyed it in court, presenting documentation of every regulation Sarah had followed, every permit she'd obtained, every precaution she'd taken. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice and ordered Cordell to pay Sarah's legal fees, $47,000 that arrived with a check and no apology. With the auction money secured, Sarah moved forward with developing the mine properly. She hired Dr. Kimura's firm to design the extraction operation, brought in mining engineers to create safe access to the deep formation, contracted environmental specialists to ensure every regulation was not just met but exceeded. The work took 8 months and cost $4.2 million, a fortune by any normal measure, but manageable now that Sarah had resources. She insisted on hiring locally where possible, bringing jobs to Harlan County, paying wages that let families stop choosing between food and electricity. Vernon became the mine's official historian, a paid position that involved preserving Thomas Clearwater's legacy, maintaining the secret office as a museum, telling visitors about the man who'd spent 11 years working alone in the darkness. Tom would have loved this, Vernon said one afternoon while watching construction crews install modern safety systems. He always said the mine could support a dozen families if it was run right. Now it'll support 100. Sarah established the Clearwater Foundation with $5 million from the auction proceeds. Its mission, providing scholarships and business loans to single mothers trying to build better lives for their children. The first year, they funded 43 women, the same number as the acre Sarah had purchased. Each recipient received the same letter. Someone once told me I was crazy for taking a chance on something everyone said was worthless. I'm betting you're not crazy. I'm betting you're brave. Prove them wrong. Emma adjusted to their new life with the resilience children possessed when adults provided stability. She attended a private school in Lexington during the week, living with a carefully vetted guardian family, returning to Harlan on weekends to help her mother at the mine. She never forgot where they'd come from, never took for granted the bedroom that was hers, the clothes that fit, the food that appeared without anxiety. On her 8th birthday, Sarah gave her daughter a rough diamond, a small yellow stone, not particularly valuable but real. This is from the first extraction from the deep formation, Sarah explained. I want you to keep it, not because it's worth money, but because it's proof that beautiful things can come from pressure and darkness and time. Just like you came from a hard situation and became something amazing. Emma held the stone carefully, turning it in the light. Can I show it at school? For my geology presentation. You can do whatever you want with it, baby. It's yours. The mine's first full-scale extraction happened on a September morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had bid $1 at the county auction. She stood at the entrance with a crowd of employees, investors, journalists, and curiosity seekers, wearing the hard hat and work boots that had become her uniform, looking nothing like the desperate woman who'd started this journey. Dr. Kimura did the honors, activating the new hydraulic lift that would carry workers 400 feet down to the crystal chamber. The machinery hummed to life, cables moving smoothly, safety systems monitoring every function. 20 minutes later, the lift returned carrying the first load of kimberlite from the deep formation. The rock was exactly as Thomas Clearwater had described, dense with crystal inclusions, sparkling even before processing, promising wealth that would take years to fully extract. Marcus Chun examined the first samples and smiled. This is going to be even better than we projected. The concentration is extraordinary. The mine's production schedule called for extracting approximately 5,000 carats per year, a conservative pace designed to maintain market prices and ensure safety. At that rate, the operation would continue for 15 years, generating approximately $400 million in revenue after all costs. Sarah owned 100% of it, but ownership brought complexities that success stories rarely mentioned. There were tax implications, investment decisions, estate planning, security concerns. Sarah hired advisors, established trusts, created corporate structures to manage wealth that felt surreal even as it became mundane. She bought a house in Harlan, not a mansion, just a comfortable home with a porch and a yard where Emma could play. She drove a new truck, practical and reliable, nothing ostentatious. She lived modestly not from fear or insecurity, but from the bone-deep knowledge that money was a tool, not a destination, and the life she'd built mattered more than the wealth that funded it. The first Christmas after the auction, Sarah invited everyone who'd helped her to a dinner at the mine office, now a renovated building with heat and electricity and furniture that didn't collapse when you sat on it. Vernon came, and Marcus Chun, and Dr. Kimura, and Patricia Hendris, and Claire Santos, the journalist who'd told Sarah's story when it mattered most. They gathered around a table Sarah had purchased from a local craftsman, eating food catered by the Harlan diner that had once employed her, drinking wine that cost more than she used to make in a week. Vernon raised his glass, hands steadier than they'd been in months. To Thomas Clearwater, who found something beautiful and protected it until someone brave enough to claim it came along. To Sarah Mitchell, Marcus added, who had the courage to trust what everyone said didn't exist. To second chances, Patricia said quietly. Sarah looked around the table at the people who'd believed in her, who'd worked on contingency, who'd taken risks because they saw in her story something worth supporting. She thought about the woman she'd been, sleeping in her car, mocked for buying a worthless mine, told repeatedly she was making a mistake. That woman would barely recognize who Sarah had become, not because of money, but because of what the journey had taught her, that the world's assessment of your worth was often wrong, that courage looked like desperation from certain angles, that the floor giving way beneath you could reveal foundations stronger than you'd imagined. To being underestimated, Sarah said, raising her own glass, and proving everyone wrong. The years that followed brought changes Sarah had never anticipated. The Clearwater mine became a tourist destination, people coming to see where diamonds grew in Kentucky soil, to hear Thomas's story, to witness proof that fortunes could still be found in America if you were willing to dig deep enough. Sarah gave tours sometimes, walking visitors through the crystal chamber, now safely accessible with modern lighting and walkways, showing them the formations where Thomas had worked alone, explaining the geology that made this deposit unique. Diamonds form about 100 miles underground, she'd explain, pointing to the kimberlite walls. They need incredible pressure and heat, conditions that only exist deep in the Earth's mantle. Then volcanic eruptions carry them to the surface, trapped in this rock. What makes the Clearwater deposit special is the concentration of colored diamonds, blues from boron, pinks from structural anomalies, yellows from nitrogen. Only about 1 in 10,000 diamonds shows natural color. Here, it's almost 1 in 3. Children would stare wide-eyed at the sparkling walls, asking if they could take pieces home. Sarah would smile and hand them polished samples, small stones worth maybe $50 each, but priceless to kids who'd remember the day they touched real diamonds pulled from Kentucky mountains. Emma grew into the mine's legacy naturally, spending summers working alongside geologists and engineers, learning the business from the ground up. She never acted entitled to the wealth she'd inherited, never forgot the months in the car, never took for granted the stability her mother had fought to create. On her 13th birthday, Emma asked if she could start working at the Clearwater Foundation, reviewing scholarship applications, helping decide which mothers got funding. "I want to help people like we needed help," she explained. "I want to be the person who says yes when everyone else says no." Sarah looked at her daughter, tall now, confident, carrying herself like someone who knew she mattered, and felt pride that had nothing to do with diamonds or wealth and everything to do with the character her child had developed through adversity. "You already are that person, baby. You've always been." Vernon passed away in his sleep during Sarah's 3rd winter in Harlan, dying peacefully in the trailer that had sheltered Emma when they'd had nowhere else to go. He was 86 years old, had lived to see Thomas Clearwater's discovery vindicated, had watched Sarah transform from desperate mother to successful entrepreneur. At his funeral, Sarah spoke about friendship and faith, about the old miner who believed in her when she'd given him every reason not to, who'd shared his expertise without asking for payment, who'd stood guard when threats came in the darkness. "Vernon taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars or diamonds," Sarah said, her voice steady despite grief. "It's measured in the people who stand beside you when standing costs them something. He stood beside me when it was dangerous and inconvenient and probably foolish. Everything good that came from the mine, everything I built, it started with Vernon saying yes when everyone else said no." She buried him in the Harlan Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Vernon Pike, friend and believer. He stood guard when it mattered most." And she endowed a technical scholarship in his name, full funding for anyone in Harlan County wanting to learn skilled trades, because Vernon had believed working with your hands was noble, and Sarah wanted that belief to outlive him. The mine continued producing year after year, extracting diamonds that funded scholarships and jobs and community development. Sarah reinvested profits into Harlan County, building a medical clinic, funding school programs, creating opportunities in a region where opportunities had been dying for decades. She never forgot what poverty felt like, never lost the muscle memory of desperation, never stopped seeing herself as the woman who'd bought a mine for $1 and bet everything on a dead man's note about treasure 400 feet underground. People called her a success story, but Sarah knew the truth. She was a survivor who'd gotten lucky, who'd found something valuable not through genius or destiny, but through refusal to accept what everyone told her was true. 5 years after the auction, Sarah stood at the mine entrance on a bright May morning, watching workers begin another shift. The operation ran smoothly now, profitable and sustainable, employing 127 people with wages that let them buy houses and send children to college and dream about futures that didn't involve leaving Kentucky to find work. Emma appeared beside her, 15 years old, and already talking about studying geology in college, about coming back to run the mine someday, about carrying Thomas Clearwater's legacy forward into a future he'd never lived to see. "Mama, Dr. Kimura says we're ahead of production schedule. They think we might find another chamber deeper down, possibly even richer than what Thomas discovered." Sarah smiled. "What do you think? Should we explore it?" "I think Thomas would say yes. I think he'd tell us the mine has more secrets, and we should keep looking." Sarah put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, remembering the girl who'd slept in the car, clutching a threadbare rabbit, who'd asked if they were going to be okay, who'd trusted her mother even when trust seemed foolish. "Then we'll look, but carefully, with proper equipment and safety protocols. We're not desperate anymore, Emma. We could take our time, do it right. Because we learned from Thomas's mistakes?" "Because we learned from his courage," Sarah corrected. "He kept working even when he was dying, even when no one believed him, even when every logical reason said to give up. That's not a mistake. That's faith. Faith that what you're doing matters, that truth eventually wins, that beautiful things can come from darkness if you're willing to dig deep enough." They stood together in the Kentucky sunshine, mother and daughter, looking at the mine entrance that had changed their lives, the hole in the ground that everyone had said was worthless, the condemned site that had held fortune. Sarah thought about the journey, from the email at 3:42 a.m. to this moment, from $1 to hundreds of millions, from sleeping in a car to owning a house and a business and a future that stretched beyond anything she'd imagined possible. She thought about Thomas Clearwater working alone in the darkness, about Vernon standing guard, about Marcus Chun taking payment on contingency, about Dr. Kimura believing in Kentucky diamonds, about Patricia fighting legal battles, about Claire telling the story when it mattered most. Success wasn't individual. It was collaborative, built from dozens of people making small choices to help, to believe, to stand beside someone everyone else had written off. And it was fragile. Sarah knew women in situations like hers who'd made different choices, who'd accepted Cordell's 60% offer, who'd sold out early for security instead of gambling on better outcomes. Those women weren't failures. They were survivors making rational decisions based on different circumstances and tolerances for risk. Sarah had gotten lucky. She'd found something real when she could have found nothing. She'd survived harassment that could have turned violent. She'd navigated legal complexities that could have bankrupted her. She'd made it when hundreds of variables could have broken differently and left her with nothing but debt and regret. But she'd also been brave. She'd bet on herself when everyone said not to. She'd worked brutally hard. She'd refused to quit when quitting was rational. Maybe success was luck and courage mixed in proportions you couldn't calculate until afterward, when you could look back and see which moments mattered, which decisions changed everything, which gambles paid off against impossible odds. The workers began descending into the mine, their voices echoing up from the shaft, calls and laughter, and the sounds of people doing work that mattered, earning wages that sustained families, building lives in a place the world had written off as dying. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another interview request from a business magazine wanting to feature her story. Another charity asking for donations. Another entrepreneur seeking advice about taking risks. The demands on her time and attention were endless now. The price of visibility, the cost of becoming someone people pointed to as proof that dreams could come true. She declined the interview, sent a donation to the charity, and wrote a careful response to the entrepreneur. "I can't tell you what risks to take. Only you know what you can afford to lose, what you're willing to fight for, what matters enough to gamble everything. But I can tell you this. The world will tell you what you're worth, what you deserve, what's realistic. Don't let their limitations become yours. And if the floor gives way beneath you, look down before you panic. Sometimes what looks like falling is actually finding what you were meant to discover all along. She sent the message and tucked the phone away, turning back to Emma and the mine and the life she'd built from courage and desperation and a $1 bet on property everyone said was worthless. Come on, baby. Let's go check on the new chamber. If there's more treasure down there, we should probably find it before someone else does. They walked together toward the mine entrance, their footsteps crunching on gravel that had once been broken dreams and was now the foundation of something beautiful. Behind them, the Kentucky mountains rose green and ancient, full of secrets still waiting to be discovered by people brave enough to dig deep, to trust what everyone said couldn't exist, to believe that sometimes the floor giving way beneath you was exactly what you needed to find solid ground. Sarah paused at the entrance, looking back at the property she'd purchased for $1, the condemned mine that had held a fortune, the worthless inheritance that had changed everything. She thought about the woman who'd opened that email at 3:42 a.m., who'd registered to bid with her last $50, who'd driven to Kentucky with a daughter and a dream and nothing else. That woman would be proud of who they'd become. Not because of money, not because of success measured in diamonds and dollars, but because they'd survived, because they'd fought when fighting was terrifying, because they trusted themselves when everyone else said they were wrong, because they'd proven that the world's assessment of your worth was just an opinion, not a fact, and opinions could be changed with enough courage, enough work, enough refusal to accept less than you deserved. The mine waited, darkness and treasure mixed together, secrets still buried in the deep formation, possibilities extending down into the earth like roots searching for water. Sarah took Emma's hand and stepped into the entrance, into the darkness that had once terrified her and now felt like coming home, into the depths where beautiful things grew from pressure and time, and the kind of faith that couldn't be measured but could be felt in every step forward. The floor had given way beneath her feet exactly when she'd needed it most. And what she'd found in the darkness had been worth every terrifying moment of the fall. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.